Good evening, YouTube. Here's another JavaScript tutorial from Devil Dog for Life, and today we're talking about levels of scope in JavaScript. So what you have is you have global scope, functional scope, and block scope. First, we're going to talk about global scope. Global scope is any variable declared not in a block code or in a function, and so it's global. So any other code with the same variable name in the global scope can modify it. When you put too many variables in global scope, this is known as polluting the global space. So it's best to limit most of your variables to put them inside functions and only have like your main programs and stuff like that are saved to variables in the global scope. It's best to limit it. So here's a variable with a identifier or name. The name of the variable is name, and its value is equal to header, or header's being assigned to the variable name with the assignment operator. So this value is being stored in this variable called name, and it's the global scope. So we'll console.log it first, so you can see that it prints header. When we refresh it, you'll see it prints header to the console over here. To get to your console, you just simply you click up here, go down to more tools, and then you go to developer tools if you're using the Google browser. If you're using another browser like IE or Mozilla, they're all very similar, maybe called different things, but it's pretty much all development tools will open up your console. And then you click on console for JavaScript. Elements would be HTML. So back to the console, so it prints header. So back to our text editor, which I'm using is Atom text editor. It's very good. I like it. It's color coded. It helps you find your mistakes or your errors, as well as the console. And so it logs header. So when we go to reassign a name here on the global scope, we'll just take this comment out. So now name is being declared again and initialized with a new value of Tom. And because they're both in the global scope, what's essentially happening is this value is a reference to this variable. It's referencing the same variable, so that it's going to store this value in there, and it's going to move. This value will no longer exist. It will now contain this value. It's not a copy. This variable, even if I use the keyword, it's still the same variable and the same name in the global scope, so it will modify this variable right here. It's referencing it. Save, open up the console again. I want to refresh. You see now it prints Tom over here in the console. That variable no longer contains that value header, which is bad if you have say you have a whole program that's built in a function that's saved to a variable, and then you go and create another variable and put a string in it, which this is right here. Anything in quotes is a string. It's a literal string value. Instead of that function or that code doing whatever it's going to do, or mathematical type of stuff, is program to figure out kids' grades or how far you're going at certain speeds or whatever it is, it will now not run because that whole function no longer exists and no longer stored in that variable. The string is now stored in that variable, so it'll just print the string instead of run that program. So this is known as, if you put too many variables in global scope, it's known as polluting the global scope, and it is very bad to pollute the global scope. You want to put most of your variables within your function, so it's tucked away safe, so it's not easy to modify, and that way you have less problems. Alright, so we'll just keep going down, and we're going to go over a functional scope now. This is what I just was talking about a minute ago. Right here I have one global variable A, and it's the string, or the value, is equal to a global scope, and it just prints a global scope goodbye. I have a function here that I name modify, and I have another variable in it with the same variable name called local scope, because it's local with a value of hello, and it's local to this function. In other words, it won't mess with this global variable, and this global variable can't mess with this variable in the function. Nothing in the global scope can get into this function. So we'll see how that prints right now, and we'll run the modified function. Oh, yeah, we'll run the modified function first. And it's going to print local scope, hello. Refresh it. So in the text editor, you see it has local scope, hello. Now I'll print the global variable A. Uncomment it. And you see the global scope variable prints goodbye. So neither one of these, they're separated in a sense. Neither one of these variables is modifying one or the other, because one's tucked away and it's only local or private to the function. It's called functional scope. So it's safe in there. It doesn't modify this one. And this one can't modify the one in the function. However, if we forget a keyword like var, which is the keyword to declare a variable, we're declaring a variable A here, and there's another two types of variables. One's called let and one's called constant. But if you don't use one of these keywords in here for A, and like say if we take it out, now what happens is this variable that's in this function leaks out to the global scope. So when we run it, it will modify this variable here in the global scope, and it will no longer say global scope goodbye. It will now say local scope hello. And since we're going to run the function, and we're running the variable and local scope here, and Council's logging both of them, then they're both going to say local scope hello. So you see here the council changed, and now they both local scope hello. So this variable within this function now has now modified this global variable out here, simply because we failed to declare it with a keyword inside the function. Var back, save, and refresh so you can see it one more time. And you see now the global variable is now printing global scope goodbye again, and the local scope is printing hello again. It's now they're separated. Even though they contain the same variable names, they're separated. They can no longer see or affect one another. Essentially, they're two different variables, and they have two different for storing the values in memory, two different spaces. Alright, now I have a little comment here to make sure I was going over this too. Kind of explain like closure a little bit. I'm still learning about closures myself because they can get pretty complex. But essentially, this is a basic closure right here that you're going to be seeing down below, or you see here with the function outer and the function inner. And why I wanted to explain this too is because there's different scope levels. The inner function has access to the outer function's variables. So in other words, it has a functional scope of the outer scope. So in other words, this outer variable in this function is not private. This function can use that. This function here called inner can use that variable, the outer variable, and see it just fine. And what this is what's also referred to as a nested function because it's nested in this other function. However, these variables in this nested function or inner function cannot be modified or used by this outer function unless we return it somehow, or pass it somehow, or call the function itself outside, or invoke the function outside of this function within the outer function, if that makes sense. So I wanted to show this real quick. So I have a variable called outer var, and this is the outer function variable is also a local to inner function too. And we're going to prove that right here. We have the inner function, and what we're doing, we have our own variable called local var, which is local to the inner function, so local variable, and it's going to print local to the inner function. And what we're returning is this variable right here, but we're also returning this variable right here, so that you can see that this inner function does in fact have access to this outer variable. So it will print this one. It'll print this local variable right here in this string. Now we have a comment to separate them right here within a string. I'm using concatenation to add both these together. And then it will print this outer variable on the other side of the comma, which is this sentence right here. So looks like returning. Looks like I'm console.log in the outer first, but we don't want to do that. We want to console.log. It's returning it, so it should call both of them. Let's see here. Undefined because I didn't log the inner function. So what we can do is we can call this inner function within the outer function, or invoke it so that it will run like this. So this is what's called invocation. It's invoking the function. This is a function name, so we're invoking it right here within the inner function so that it will run within the inner function. So that when we call this outer function in the console.log, it runs this return statement. Nope, still undefined. Oh, it's not console.log. Let's run the outer function, and we'll run the inner function inside. And there you go. So now it prints the local to the inner function. So that's the local var that was in the inner function. And then the outer function variable also prints local to the inner function too. So you can see that this outer var is available in the inner function. This outer, the outer function's variable, outer var, is available in the inner function. We run that, we return it, and then we run this inner function within the outer. And then we call the outer function, immediately invoke it so that it will run this function. Now let's see if we can see. Let's just run the outer now. Console.log. Well, it's coming out undefined, and I'll figure it out later. But anyway, the important point I was trying to get across was that any functions within within inner functions that are built-in functions, or any variables in the outer functions are stumbling over my words here. Any functions that have variables in it that have nested functions within them are, wow, tongue twister. Anyway, variables in the outer function are always available to inner functions. There you go. So I was trying to say. But variables in nested functions are not available to the outer functions that they're nested in. Hopefully I said that right. Anyway, moving on. This is supposed to be a quick class, and they usually never are. We're going to talk about block level scope now. And this comes along with the new, it's either ECMAScript 5 or ECMAScript 6, new specifications for JavaScript, that new ways to declare variables came out. And I highlighted one of them. It's called let. And let has block scope. Var was the only way to declare a variable. I think before, it was either before ECMAScript 5 or ECMAScript 6. I'm not quite sure. So what var does, or what let does, is it ensures that the variable in block level doesn't modify any variables in the global scope. Now, if I console.log it right, which I didn't do before, it should work. So we'll console.log both. First, we're going to console.log the one in the inner, in the block scope, or the block code, which is going to print 7 to the screen, and then we console.log the global one, which is going to print 5 to the screen. I'll see, it only ran the global scope. Oh no, I ran both of them. See, block level scope printed 7 first, like I said, and then the global scope printed 5. However, to show just how this works, I'm going to change this to var. Take the let out, because let is what allows block scope to work. And now you see both the block level scope and the global scope, they're both 7. So using the variables in just normal blocks of code, like here in between these brackets, also modifies with the same name. It will also modify variables with the same name in the global scope. But when we change it back to let, save, go up, refresh, it does not have that effect. The one in the global scope retains its value, and the one in the block level scope retains its value, even though they have the same variable names again. Which is good because it provides another layer of separation. Keeps your code from being corrupted or somehow easily modified. And it's a good habit to get in using let even in the global scope. So like declaring all your variables with let instead of var, whether it's in a block or not. Alright, well that concludes this tutorial. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or said anything wrong, or you have want to comment, please leave me a comment below, or anything I need to go over. And like I said, anything I said wrong that I can maybe address. And if you like my videos, please subscribe. Thank you.